Well, welcome, folks, to the C Files. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to angle this just a slight bit there. I've been using a stand when I'm putting my Bible up on it, so that's why it's a little bit at an angle. But right now, we're in this book. There, can you see that? Battle for Christmas by, there you go, Stefan Nessenbaum. And we're reading about the history of Christmas in the United States. And what a fascinating history it is. I'm on page 215. And in this chapter, they started talking about a battle between two different sects, trains of thought in the Unitarian Church, which was involved with Christmas and Christmas gift giving to children, and that tradition that came about in the 1800s. And it came about mainly because of literary uh, how can I say this? I use the word literary and it's not working with anything. Mainly because of literature that was written in the 1800s. There we go. That talked about, they'll say, stories that were told in literature that brought up the idea of giving gifts to children, um, so that they could the whole idea was to get rid of this parading around in the streets and people coming in and demanding things from the rich people, the poor demanding things from the rich, almost like a Christmas/Halloween type of deal that was going on. And they thought, well, maybe we could internalize it where gifts are being given to children, and that'll kind of help to stop that, along with the organization of professional police force, mainly in Boston and New York was a lot of it where it was going on, Philadelphia as well. And that put a stop to a lot of that old tradition, as tradition of Christmas misrule, which caused the Puritans to reject Christmas and ban it basically because they didn't like that aspect of it. But this new tradition that came out in 1800s of giving gifts to children helped to sway that away. The giving gifts of children was praised in the press and praised in the storybooks, and the misrule was seen as awful, demonic, horrible. So that's how they kind of began to sway society and change it over to what we have as part of our tradition today. Well, the Unitarians began to debate among themselves because one particular Unitarian was saying, well, children could teach adults. Children are born the sensus divinitatis, if you will, the sense of the divine, which Apostle Paul talks about in Romans 1. He takes that and he really takes it way to the extreme, saying that children are born with the spirit of Christ, the spark of God within them, and they can teach adults. We must be more like children because Christ said, "Come to me like a child would come to me, like a little child." And he really just takes those passages out of the Bible and just really throws them way off into a bad interpretation, really overemphasized them. And the other side of Unitarian said, no, 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 no. Children have to be disciplined. They have to, if you just give gifts to them all the time, you're going to spoil them rotten, and it's not good. Children have to be disciplined. And so there's your two factions, and they're kind of fighting with each other. We come to 215, and it says some perfect children. So here we go. Beginning in about 1840, yet another kind of Christmas story began to appear. This kind of story was about children who were already perfect in the romantic Pestalozzo, Pest, Pestalozzian, or Pestalozzian, I should say. It would be Losian because it's one O. Pestalozzian sense. Two O's would be the U sound. I'll read it again. This kind of story was about children who were already perfect in the romantic Pestalozzian sense, comma. Now, Pestalozzian is the side that says, "Oh, children have the divine spark, and we should learn from the children." That's that side that caused all that trouble in the Unitarian Church. So I'll read it and go through the comment. This kind of story was about children who were already perfect in the romantic Pestalozzian sense, children who did not need to be taught a lesson about selfishness because they were utterly unselfish by nature. And let me stop for just a moment because I'm thinking this heater I have over here is making a lot of noise. So let me turn that down. Okay, I'm back. I hope that short pause didn't cause too much angst and anxiety for you folks. As me kicking the trash can down here may have caused for me. All right, now I know you guys see the sky and the earth behind me. Look, I mean, I'm actually in a room, okay? Here we go. Uh so yeah, this was a big controversy. Let me go to the next sentence. At the very least, these children were willing, even eager, to sacrifice their own Christmas gifts to make other children or even grown-ups happy. There it is. That's where we start getting the mentality of parents give to the children, but children also have to give to others and to their parents. There's where it evened out, where you're not necessarily spoiling the kids, because the kids they get to experience the joy of giving to others. That's the other section of it, the other part. At the very least, these children were willing, even eager, to sacrifice their own Christmas gifts to make other children or even grown-ups happy. On occasion, they were willing, even eager, to sacrifice their very lives. Now, that's pretty extreme. Perhaps the best known of these stories is Louise May Alcott's classic novel, Little Women, 1868. Now, that one's still popular. They even made some movies of that one. I know that my daughters enjoyed that one. This book opens with an extended Christmas sequence in which the four young title characters voluntarily give their Christmas presents to an impoverished neighboring family. Louise May Alcott herself was the daughter of Bronson Alcott and the radical um, Pestalozzian transcendentalist, a man who had raised his children in the Pestalozzian fashion. Little Women was, of course, a tremendous bestseller. But by the time it was published in 1868, these issues, along with the Christmas tree itself, had thoroughly permeated middle class American culture. But as it happens, another associate of Bronson Alcott's had addressed a wide audience on similar matters a full generation earlier. This was Margaret Fuller, the first great female American intellectual figure. Back in 1835, Fuller had assisted Alcott in running his radical temple school. And it was she who actually wrote the controversial 1836 book, Conversations with Children on the Gospels, that had caused so many conservative Unitarians, including Harriet Martineau, to take offense. Fuller had also been among the very first American intellectuals to devote serious study to German language and philosophy. In 1844, Margaret Fuller was living in New York and trying to support herself by writing for Horace Greeley's successful newspaper, successful new newspaper, the New York Tribune. Yeah, we're going back a few years, aren't we? It was she who authored the Christmas editorial that appeared in the Tribune on December 25th, 1844. An editorial read by thousands of people. Fuller wrote, Christmas would seem to be the day particularly sacred to children, and sometimes of this feeling shows itself among us through rather of German influence than of native growth. The evergreen tree is often reared for the children on Christmas evening, and its branches cluster with little tokens that may at least give them a sense that the world is rich and that there are some in it who care to bless them. It is a charming sight to see their glittering eyes, and well worth much trouble in preparing the Christmas tree. We borrow the Christmas tree from Germany. Might we but borrow with it that feeling which pervades all their stories about the influence of the Christ child, and has, I doubt not, for the spirit of literature is always, though refined, the essence of popular life, pervaded the conduct of children there. Here Fuller retold two German Christmas legends. The first was about Saint Herman Joseph, a lovely child who one day offered an apple to a church sculpture of the Virgin and Child. And the sculpture, young Jesus, put forth its hand and took the apple. Oh boy. From that time forth, little Herman took every gift he received and carried it to the same place. He needed nothing for himself, but dedicated all his childish goods to the altar. The second legend was about the holy Rupert, a young prince who gave away his possessions whenever he saw a suffering child. One cold day, Prince Rupert gives away his coat, stops, and falls asleep on the road home, and has a dream. He dreams of a bald old man who bathes a group of children in a river and then places them on a beautiful island where they looked white and glorious as little angels. One of these children turns out to be little Jesus, who is wearing the coat that Rupert had given him. Upon waking, Rupert tells ill. I'm sorry. Upon waking, Rupert takes ill from having stayed out in the cold without a coat. He dies, and at last he is able to join the band of little children he has helped. Wow. Margaret Fuller acknowledged that these stories were legends, Catholic legends at that, but she insisted that they were useful, good legends, and Protestants should not reject them. I'll be right back. Okay, so I had an important phone call come in, so I had to pause for just a second, but we get right back to it. The thought of Jesus as a child has great weight with children who have learned to think of him at all. That is, the child Jesus can become a model for modern children. In early days, the little saints thought they imitated the Emmanuel by giving apples and coats, i.e., like Herman and Rupert. but we know not why in our age that esteems itself so enlightened. They should not become also the givers of spiritual they should not become also the givers of spiritual gifts. If children were taken seriously and educated properly at home, they could save the world. If they were not, the fault lay in the parents. The cause of education would be indefinitely furthered if, in addition to formal means, there were but this principle awakened in the hearts of the young, that what they have they must bestow. Were all this were all this right in the private sphere, the public sphere would soon right itself also, and the nations of Christendom might join in the celebration such as kings and prophets waited for, and so many martyrs died to achieve the Christ Mass. Margaret Fuller spent part of her own Christmas Day that year visiting inmates of the city's asylum for deaf and dumb children. Um, the experience, she reported 3 days later, was one of personal edification and delight. The children at the asylum put on a theatrical performance for the visitors, a performance that demonstrated that they were capable of expressing intense and authentic emotion. Fuller wrote, "It was gratifying to see the faces of so many children of eternal silence radiate with intelligence and evincing a knowledge and elevation of sentiment which it would seem impossible, thus benighted, to acquire." The performance put on by these deaf and dumb children represented one end of the spectrum of New York's Christmas season in 1844. Like an increasing number of New Yorkers, Horace Greeley found it considerably more satisfying than what was still going on and would continue to go on at the other end of that spectrum, that same spectrum. Writing a week later, another Tribune reporter commented on what the streets of the city were actually like on New Year's Day. The Gorg shops, we regretted to observe, overflowed throughout the day. So did some of the visitors toward evening. So did some of their visitors toward evening. This was the worst feature of the anniversary, though the howling and popping and begging through the preceding night were little better. What a profundity, what a profundity of emptiness there must be in that boy's head who deems gun firing an appropriate observance of the solemn, majestic, noiseless march of time. Let me try it again. I flubbed that, so let me do it again. This was the worst feature of the anniversary, though the howling and popping and banging through the preceding night were little better. What a profundity of emptiness there must be in that boy's head who deems gun firing an appropriate observance of the solemn, majestic, noiseless march of time. This reporter had even seen one 18-year-old youth loading and firing a fowling piece through the streets at midday. And he concluded with the sentence that expressed the behavioral concerns of one culture in terms of the generational assumptions of another. The mother of that boy has much to answer for. And that ends the chapter. We're in chapter 6, Tiny Tim and other charity cases. I'm at 30 minutes, even with that long pause. Let me see. How much can I get done? Maybe this first section. So let's read this through the first section. I'll put another 15 minutes in. Tiny Tim and other charity cases. Home life in Germany. The year 1853 marked two important achievements in the life of young Charles Loring Brace. The first achievement was practical. Brace helped establish the Children's Aid Society, a New York charitable institution that would become, within his lifetime and due chiefly to his unceasing efforts, the most important charitable organization in the city and probably the entire United States. Brace's other achievement was literary, the publication of a book. That book, Home Life in Germany, would soon be forgotten, overshadowed both by Brace's subsequent literary work and, more important, by his labors with the Children's Aid Society itself. But it is of interest here, if only because of the light it cast on Brace's subsequent charitable work with children and also on his enduring interest in Christmas. Home Life in Germany was a travelogue of sorts, the account of an extended visit Brace had made to that country 2 years earlier at the age of 25. During his visit, Brace was struck by several important contrasts between Germany and his native United States. For example, Germans intended to be far less individualistic and self-reliant than Americans were. On the other hand, family life, the main subject of Brace's book, was far more important in Germany than it was in America. The contrast between home life of the two cultures came to a head at Christmas. Brace devoted an entire chapter of home life in Germany to an account of the Christmas celebration in that country. Here too, the graciousness of German culture contrasted with the emptiness Brace found in the United States. As I recall, our hollow home life in many parts of America, the selfishness and coldness in families, the little hold home has on anyone, and the tendency of children to get rid of it as early as possible. I am conscious how much, after all, we have to learn from these easy Germans. Brace acknowledged that there was a certain compensation for this failing. In the United States, a boy is an independent, self-reliant man when he is still in leading strings in Germany. But for the most part, that compensation was inadequate because self-reliance alone was no asset at all, unless it was softened by unselfish geniality. Otherwise, it would only to intensify the hollowness of American home life. And that was just what was happening in the United States, where the acquisitive spirit was destroying family values. Materialism, the passion for money making and excitement, is eating up the heart of our people. We are not happy people. We're not a happy people. Our families are not happy. Men look haggard and anxious and weary. We want something more genial and social and unselfish amongst us. What was needed was an antidote of raw materialism, and such an antidote was provided by the domestic Christmas. Any family festivals of this kind, Brace wrote, anything which will make home pleasanter, which will bind children together and make them conscious of a distinct family life, is most strongly needed. For Brace, as for so many Americans, Christmas was now above all a domestic ideal, an opportunity to produce and foster family values as an antidote to materialism and selfishness. Once again, Germany offered an object lesson for Americans. There is something about this German festival, which one would seldom see in our home enjoyments. People do not seem to be enjoying themselves because it is a duty to be cheerful. They are cheerful because they cannot help it and because they all love one another. The expression of truthfulness through the children of these families was very beautiful to see. They were also happy because they had been making one another happy. Christmas in Germany was an occasion of unforced, spontaneous mutuality. Brace connected this domestic Christmas with authentic religious piety. Good people are to recognize that there is a religion in Christmas feast, as well as in prayer meetings, that a father who has made his home gloomy has done quite as great a wrong to his children, perhaps, as he who made it irreligious. We want these German habits, these birthday and Christmas festivals, this genial family life. It is difficult to imagine a better definition of what modern historians have taken to calling the religion of domesticity. There was more. Brace reported that in Germany, such close-knit, nurturing families were to be found much further down the social ladder than they were in America, indeed, down nearly to the bottom of the working class. Like so many Americans of this period, Brace saw Germany as the one place in the world where true family values had permeated almost the entire society. And the consequences were even apparent in public. For example, the German working class was far more polite and deferential than its American or English counterpart. Brace cited a vivid example. He had once asked an English groom for directions in the streets of London and was told in answer, how the blank should I know? How the H double hockey sticks should I know? An American laborer, he added, would be almost as rude. But in Germany, things were different. A German stands, says to you with a half bow, be good enough to take the second street, etc., and touches his hat as he goes. Brace added that such a response might perhaps be a little too much for a Yankee to take, but he added that it was still a very pleasant thing. Brace attributed that difference to a single point. The lessons in the natural expression of any feeling that almost all German children learned from their families, the kind of feelings that were laughed at in childhood by the parents of their American counterparts. Brace added that in the United States, such feelings were pruned away. In other words, Brace attributed working class rudeness in the United States to a home life that was cold, unsocial, disagreeable. In a way, this was what most impressed Brace about the German Christmas itself. How far down the social ladder it reached. That was just how he introduced his chapter on the German Christmas. The Berlin lodging house at which Brace had been staying over the holidays was owned by a man who was hopelessly in debt. Nonetheless, Brace watched this man bringing home an armful of presents. Then there was the local shoemaker, whose family lived in the basement of Brace's lodging house. The family was so poor that the children often seemed to go hungry. But sure enough, Brace spotted through the low window a green Christmas tree. And the children are tying on the bits of candle. Brace summed up his point by asserting that in all of Berlin, there were not a dozen families so poor as not to have their Christmas tree. Brace did not need to add the obvious. Men who celebrated Christmas like the Berlin shoemaker, who lived in the basement, were the kind of men who would never talk back to their betters, who would never say, "How the H double hockey sticks should I know?" They were, on the contrary, precisely the kind of men who were likely to answer a stranger's question with a polite half bow and a deferential touch of the hat. And they would raise their children to do the same. Now, when we come back, we will pick up where it says Ebenezer Scrooge and the Cratchits. So now we're going to get into a Christmas Story, right? By Charles Dickens. And I've been looking forward to that one. So I'm looking forward to the next reading on this. Thank you for watching. I'm going to be doing a devotion time in the next video. So please don't forget to join me for that. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And, join the channel so you can have a little something, when you need to wind down from all of the stress of the news, you can come here and wind down a little bit. So God bless you guys. I'll see you next time here on the C-Files.